Hey everyone, professional photographer Ian Plant here. And at PhotoMasters, we like to talk with established photographers, but we also like to keep an eye out for up and comers who are just beginning to make their mark. And in this video, I'm talking with a young conservation photographer, Soren Goldsmith, who, despite his young age, is already working with National Geographic. So we expect great things from Soren, and there's a lot to learn from him now. So if you want to learn more, stay tuned. Hey, Soren, welcome to PhotoMasters.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to be talking with you. You are very young, yet very accomplished at the same time. So, why don't we start off by having you give us some of your background, how you got into photography and what you've been doing since then?
Yeah, so right now I'm a National Geographic Young Explorer, which means that the National Geographic Society is funding me to do a project. And I'm working with salt marshes in Massachusetts, my home. And my past work has been a lot with camera traps and with using that to document urban wildlife in areas around New England.
So, I've got to ask, how old are you?
I'm 19 right now, almost 20.
19, and you're already a National Geographic photographer. That's amazing. How long have you been taking photos?
I started during COVID, so it's been about 5 years now, but I'd say that's when started taking it seriously. I'd say I've been taking photos since well before that, as soon as I got a phone, maybe when I was in sixth grade.
So, what are you doing for this salt marsh project?
The Salt Marsh Project is really cool. It's basically about telling the story of these ecosystems that have really been ignored for the longest time. And right now we're in a really unique situation because the combination of sea level rise and a lot of conservation work right now is putting them in a position where it's it's kind of the tipping point. If we're able to make the impacts we want to make and remediate and restore these marshes now, then we can protect our coastal communities, our wildlife before it's too late, before we lose them. The project is basically about finding innovative and engaging ways to tell the story of this marsh. How can we make the things like that are very slow moving, like sea level rise or marsh recession, easier to engage with, easier to relate to?
It seems to me that your work has a very strong conservation theme. So, not only with this salt marsh project, but some of your previous projects, it seems that your goal was to draw attention to wild areas and to wild animals and to encourage people to protect those wild spaces.
Yeah, I think, as I started progressing down my photography journey, there was always this I was striving for a purpose. Why am I taking this photo? That's a cool photo of a coyote, but what significance does this have? And that's really what led me into the conservation arc. And when I was a junior in high school, I ended up applying for this grant from Mass Audubon, which is an organization of my state. And they gave me funding to do a project where I could really explore that using camera traps. And the idea was, if I can reveal this unseen wildlife that's existing in my community, people are going to be more connected to it because, at least where I live, it's a very urban environment and people think of wildlife as something that's only in a national park or only in, some remote location. But really we have such a cool diversity right in an urban area that people rarely get to see.
Yeah, and these are some of my favorite photos of yours. And part of what I like about them is that you're photographing not in these exotic destinations, or you're not working with exotic, charismatic megafauna. You're working with the species that are quite literally, it seems, in your backyard. And you're finding a way to be creative with those species, those common species that people probably see maybe sometime during their everyday life. They might spot one of these animals and kind of say, "Oh, that's cool. There's a skunk," but then move on and not think about it. But you're actually focusing on these animals as your subject and making creative photographs.
Yeah, what I realized, and this is kind of the power of camera traps for me, is that a photo you can see this skunk here, that's not a photo you could possibly take with a handheld camera. It's dark out. Unless you have a full lighting rig out in the woods and you're standing there, then you're never going to get that lighting and that photo, that skunk, because during the day they're hidden away.
So let's talk about the experience of working with a camera trap. So, what goes into setting one of these up, and how do you ensure that you end up with a good photograph in the end? I mean, you obviously have to put some thought into lighting, and you're using artificial light, and you also have to put some thought into composition. So, what's your approach to make sure that you get the creative photos that you want?
My favorite part of a camera trap is, and I think it's a really misunderstood part, is that in my eyes, it's the only form of photography, of wildlife photography, where you have complete control over your frame. So in the case, if you're going up to an animal that's in the wild, you can't control where it's going to be. It's going to be wherever you see it. But in a camera trap, I can say, I know it will only trigger if this coyote stands right here, which means that I can put together a composition where I can control its position in the frame, its location in the frame. So really getting a grasp on how to light these scenarios and having a really clear vision before it happens of what you want it to look like. It takes practice, it takes experience, and they're pretty complicated systems, but they are able to really get these shots that are extremely unique.
And how do you manage to get the right wildlife species to interact with the camera trap? So that, there's got to be a lot of understanding of the mannerisms and behaviors of that species to set up the camera trap in a place where you're likely to get the image that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think this is where it gets into like ecology knowledge and really understanding your species, understanding what you're working with. And when I'm setting up camera traps, I sort of look for a couple of things, but the biggest thing is I call it like a funnel or a choke point or a location where a lot of wildlife is being condensed into a smaller area. Like a good example, this would be a river crossing. If there's a log that's across the stream, then every animal is going to have to cross over that log. So if you're looking for something like a coyote, you might say, hey, where do coyotes hang out? What might attract them? One time I set up, in order to get coyotes, I found a dead raccoon in the middle of the woods. So I put my camera trap right in the raccoon and it attracted the coyotes. And so that sort of knowledge and understanding the type of environment your animal is going to be in is really the key thing.
So I wanted to ask you a question about some of your bobcat photos. So this is the sort of thing I expect to see. When I see a bobcat photo, I expect to see some elusive cat wandering through the forest. But this photo here is a view of a bobcat that I'm not used to seeing. So this is more out in the open. This is a wider shot with the landscape. So you're putting the animal in the context of its environment. Can you tell us a little bit about the backstory behind this photo?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you pointed this out. Yeah, so what I realized, I was talking about purpose earlier, and a big part of that purpose that I was finding is that when we're looking at like protecting these animals and like the wildlife itself, what we really need to do is protect the land. Because ultimately, a coyote, there's a lot of coyotes, they move around, they're replaceable, but the land itself is not replaceable. That's the central thing to protect, but people generally have a harder time connecting to, a tree versus a living, breathing animal with eyes that's fluffy, that's cute. So I shifted my focus and I started thinking about how can I contextualize these animals in their environment? How can I take a photo of an animal and use that as the bridge to make people care about the land? So that's what I'm doing here. I love shooting on wider lenses that allow me to see more of the land. And here, that's what I did. I said, we have this bobcat here. Let's see what its environment, where does it live? I can learn so much more about this animal now than I could if it was just a close-up portrait. And so this photo was taken in Point Reyes, in just north of San Francisco.
So it seems like a very lucky encounter.
Yeah, I mean, Point Reyes is a good spot for bobcats, but it's still definitely hard to find. When we saw this one, it was like way out in the field, and some people with a spotting scope were able to find it. It kind of reminded me, if you've ever been to Yellowstone looking for the wolves.
Well, the final image I wanted to talk about was this one right here, which is very striking. And I would probably say this is my favorite photo of yours. There's a lot of things going on here, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about this image and what you were thinking when you made this photo.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So this was probably the photo that really kickstarted my interest in conservation. And when I took it, I was probably a sophomore in high school, and I was sitting on the side of the road at like 2 or 3 a.m., just waiting with my friend in dead silence. Because we thought if we made a peep, the coyote wouldn't come by. And we knew that they crossed here, but we didn't know when. So we were almost going to give up. It was like pretty cold. And eventually, like probably 10 minutes before we were going to leave, a group of 3 coyotes popped out and ended up walking across the road. And I mean, I was excited. This is the first coyote I'd ever seen. And I freaked out, and I was able to line up and get this photo. And I love it because, those yellow lines in this road, it's clearly a pretty busy road. And here we have a coyote right in the center of it, something that's really people see as wild. And there it is in this urban environment. But the thing about this photo that really probably left the greatest impact on me was the reaction I got when I shared it, because people see this photo and they're like, "Oh my God, a coyote in my town." And the first responses I was getting was like, "Wow, Soren, you're so brave. That must have been so scary." And I was like, this wasn't scary at all. This coyote is not going to hurt you. We should be excited to see this, not thinking that I'm like some sort of brave hero for facing the coyote. That's the wrong mindset. And that's really what attracted me to the camera trap project. Because it allowed me to get these more personal photos of the coyote where they didn't look like they were in a shadow and they didn't look sort of scary. I can see why this photo makes that coyote look like a shadow or something that you might not want to mess with.
Yeah, with the lighting, it's really unusual because you can't really see the coyote's eyes. You just see the shape, and it's almost mostly in silhouette. So I guess that might add a little bit of a sinister mystery to this photograph. But I really love that contrasty, dramatic lighting. And I love the fact that the sides of the road and the yellow stripes in the middle create these wonderful leading lines. They just draw the viewer deeper into the composition. And this also has a lot of depth to it, this feeling of depth. You've got the foreground lines, but you're looking down at the coyote. There's a dip in the road, and then the road goes up on the back side of the photograph. And so you can see the road in the background. And so the three visual layers working together, that foreground where the coyote is, and then the background row, just give this photograph such a wonderful feeling of depth.
Yeah, that was one of the most striking parts about it when I saw it in my camera for the first time. And it was a very challenging lighting situation because you're fully reliant on these street lights that weren't very bright. Um, but yeah, just the way that road comes up behind it at that perfect angle, because it just as easily could have been in a situation where that road wasn't sloping up or I was looking at it from the other direction, but I was really fortunate to be able to line up a shot like this.
So you started photography at a very young age, and you've been very successful. What advice do you have for other young photographers who are looking to get into this?
The biggest thing that I think is be persistent and focus on the meaning behind your photography. Why are you doing this? Is it because you want to create beautiful visuals? Is it because you want to protect a place you love? Is it because, you know, you want to win a contest? Whatever it is, it's important to have a goal in mind and focus on that goal and do everything you can to achieve it. I would say the biggest thing for me was, when I found this conservation photography, to really apply myself to it, to know where I wanted to go. Because when you have a photo in mind that you want to get, you're going to be a lot more successful than not having a plan.
Well, that is great advice, and I think that's a great place to end the interview. Soren, thank you so much for coming on to PhotoMasters. It's been a real pleasure talking with you and looking at your photos. And I have to admit, I'm very jealous that in just a few short years, you have already become a National Geographic photographer, something that I haven't been able to accomplish in 20 years as a professional photographer. So you're off to a great start. I think we're going to see great things from you in the future. I'm looking forward to watching your career as it unfolds. Thank you so much for coming on.